Welcome back. A lot's riding on the government collecting outstanding taxes, particularly following the adjustment to the gaming tax. The 2019-2020 period will mark the first full year of collecting those increased taxes, and according to Financial Secretary Marlon Johnson, the figure there is pegged at an additional $20 million for gaming houses. Backing that was Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Peter Turnquest during this morning's post-budget press conference at the Hilton Hotel.
As far as we're concerned, we're projecting based upon a conservative number and based upon the negotiated rates.
Now, the DPM acknowledges that at this point there are still some gaming houses that have not complied with the new tax system. However, he says the projected figure takes all of them into account.
We have no reason to believe that they will not live up to their commitment, and what we think is a reasonable solution, alternative that we come up with.
When asked what's to happen to those who aren't compliant, here's his response.
Each of us as citizens have an obligation to pay our fair share. We do not have a progressive tax system, and so that requires that those of us who have an obligation, and particularly those of us who have more, and you'd be surprised at the class of people that don't pay their taxes. It's not the poor people. Poor people, vulnerable people pay their taxes. It's normally upon the high end people who can traditionally afford to pay that don't pay. And so we are going to enforce the law that are on the book. Again, this is not a punitive exercise.
This is the second year the Deputy Prime Minister has hosted a post-budget press conference, the overall aim of which is to hopefully clear up any misconceptions coming out of the budget communication. Now, the government's taken on additional money, making measures to boost revenue, and this includes leveling the playing field, as the Deputy Prime Minister puts it, between the hotels and vacation home rental market. This in light of more tourists opting for the latter.
All online marketplaces that advertise and facilitate vacation rentals in the Bahamas will now be required to pay value-added tax on those rentals and related sales in the Bahamas. Thus, companies such as Airbnb, HomeAway, and VRBO, and all such marketplaces with short-term rentals in the Bahamas will be required to pay value-added tax. I can advise today that some of these online marketplaces have already become VAT registrants and have been paying value-added tax.
Cruising permit fees will also go up, considering the significant amount of money the government is missing out on.
From $150 on boats up to 34 feet and $300 on boats 35 feet and over, to a set rate based on size and length of stay, ranging from $150 per 3 months to $4,000 per year. These rates will become effective January 1, 2020. I wish to note also that we will be introducing the online portal for electronic payments for both cruising permits and eventually for charter fees.
The need to boost revenue in the upcoming fiscal year comes as a shortfall closes out the 2018-2019 period. Revenues to sit at about $2.4 billion, $238 million, or 9% lower than what was budgeted at the start of the fiscal year. The new agreement with gaming operators, the delayed implementation of the Revenue Enhancement Unit, coupled with the concessions granted to hotels and contractors in respect of the introduction of the higher VAT rate, are all set to blame.
On the expenditure front, total outlays are projected to equal approximately $2.6 billion, which is also some 9%, or $259.1 million, below the amount initially budgeted for the year. Of this total, approximately $172.3 million is anticipated to be settled in respect of arrears in line with the budget projections. Based on these developments, Mr. Speaker, we therefore anticipate that the fiscal deficit to total some $229 million in 2018-19, representing 1.8% of GDP.
On the expenditure side, up to April, that shot up by $216 million to $1.9 billion. The government's attributing that to $111.2 million increase in spending on the use of goods and services, and that includes arrears payments. According to the Minister of Finance, that's totaled $126.9 million, some 73.8% of the $172 million budgeted in this regard.
In addition, spending on subsidies advanced by $54.7 million to $312.7 million, while other transfers, inclusive of social assistance benefits, grants, and payments, grew by $41.5 million to $235.5 million. For its part, spending on the compensation of employees tapered by $28.9 million, or 4.8%, to $576.9 million, reflecting more precise budgeting as opposed to a decrease in total headcount.
Again, once all the numbers are in, it's projected that total outlays will equal $2.6 billion. That's $259.1 million lower than the amount initially budgeted. Based on those developments, it's anticipated that the fiscal deficit will total $229 million in 2018-2019, 1.8% of GDP, or as the DPM touted it, an historical feat. Well, consumers can rest easy this upcoming fiscal year, considering the government's intention to implement tax reliefs on selected items. The government granted the Bahamas Musicians and Entertainers Union's wish for duty-free musical instruments. When asked how it came up with the list of proposed tax relief measures, including school supplies and household appliances, Financial Secretary Marlon Johnson says this.
The policy direction that we will go on is to try to find within the commonly important items, those things would be most impactful for what we call sort of ordinary behaviors, the person on the street. And so looking at it, as we define the commonly important items, we saw that there was still some potential for duty reduction around school supplies, given that, many of us have kids or had small kids. And so we know what going back to school, what that cost is like. So school supplies was a natural category as we look through it, because those are commonly important items. And of course, household goods and furniture, because of course, anybody who's had to build out a house knows the expense involved in that.
Mr. Johnson adds that the government wants to encourage home ownership. He says based on policy directives received by the ministry, the government simply wanted to impact as much Bahamians as possible. Central Bank Governor John Roll weighing in on the 2019-2020 budget communication, saying that what's important is that the government work to reduce the deficit. He adds that measures must be put in place to get the deficit lower.
Of course, democratically, you will continue to have debates and different opinions as to whether strategically you're on point or not. But the message that is consistently being there in the Bahamas is that we have to reduce those. And we have to reduce those as a way of, over time, getting the debt burden of the country lower. And I think that's a very important message that continues to come across in the budget.
Now, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Peter Turnquest, in his communication yesterday, asserted that the government would meet with commercial banks to see how best they can work with Bahamians in adjusting bank fees. To that, the central bank governor says an important part of that process is understanding the cost structure in the banking system.
What we do have is the costs get passed along to consumers in the form of fees, but also in that fee structure there is also the targeted level of profit that the institutions might be aiming for, and its profitability in the context of what you can derive from one source of income versus your core operations, which traditionally would be credit. The credit environment for financial institutions is still not as strong or as recovered as it could be.
Rolls advising the public to read and understand the budget for themselves. Now, the central bank governor was tight-lipped on whether or not he supports the 2019-2020 budget or if he feels the government will meet its fiscal projections by the end of the fiscal year. You're watching JCN News. Stay with us.
This segment of the news was brought to you by Alive.